Welcome to Becoming Limitless. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs who want to optimize their brain and their body with biohacking. I'm going to teach you how to eliminate brain fog and upgrade your health so you can have more productivity, energy, and growth in your business. I'm your host, Tanessa Shears. Let's jump in. Welcome to episode 31 of the podcast. I have a special guest on today, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear her episode. This was such a fun episode to record because everything she said, I had even more questions. And I was like, oh my gosh, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. And even after we finished recording, I was asking so many questions on different things because what she talks about is so fascinating. So on today's episode, you're going to be hearing from our special guest, Erin Kenney. So Erin is a registered dietitian, holistic cannabis practitioner, and CEO of Nutrition Rewired, which is a Boston-based company providing nutrition counseling and meal planning to help individuals achieve optimal physical and mental health and well-being. She specializes in gastrointestinal issues, eating disorders, mental health, and addiction. Her passion stems from her own personal journey with gastrointestinal disorders and getting to the root cause through an integrated nutrition approach. We talk about so many different things on this episode, including, Erin's own story and why it's so important to her. We talk about brain fog and how it might be related to what you're eating and your gut health, something called the vagus nerve. We talk about leaky gut. We talk about if food sensitivity tests are even helpful, all the ones that we're seeing on mainstream social media right now, and so many of the misconceptions that we have about the gut. This is an episode you don't want to miss, so let's jump in. Welcome back to the Becoming Limitless podcast. Today, I have a very fun guest. I have today on the show, Erin Kenney, and we are going to be talking about something today that is so important to entrepreneurs. We know that our ability to, get what we need to get done within the right amount of time so that, work isn't spilling over into our personal life has a lot to do with how clear our thinking is and how we are able to manage our brain fog specifically. So I have been following Erin on Instagram for a while now, and she puts up a ton of good posts on everything to do from gut health to nutrition. So I brought Erin specifically on the show today because brain fog is connected to your gut. And this is something that she is an expert on. And I want her to shine a little bit of light on the things we need to be looking for, what might be the cause of some of the brain fog, and is it connected to your gut? So I am so excited to have her on today. Welcome to the show, Erin. How are you doing?
Doing well, thanks, Tanessa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about you and yourself and how you got into this whole field of nutrition.
Yeah, well, it's actually very appropriate because a lot of the things that you just mentioned were things that I had previously struggled with. So grew up with horrible digestive issues, a lot of stress in my life, and also really just wasn't fueling my body properly. Your standard, eat one meal a day type of thing, maybe have some chips for dinner, maybe a bag of popcorn, was not well hydrated, things like that. And I also suffered from mental health issues. So talk about the perfect storm right there, right? So it was a selfish reason for me getting into this field was when I started to make changes in my own life, which there was a lot of different motivators for me from, mental health issues in my family. There was a breakup with a boyfriend. There was desire to just want to feel better and look better. And what I started doing is properly fueling my body, healing my gut. And ultimately what that did was improve my quality of life, my performance. I was more focused. I was more, great at managing my time and relationships. And all of this was a result of me taking care of my gut health and, fueling my body properly. So now I am using that passion to help others do the same.
That's so fun. And your company's name is Nutrition Rewired. How did you name that? Where did that come from?
Yeah, it really stems from a lot of the diet culture practices that I was told, from social media and from Google searches when I was trying to figure out how to optimize my own health. And I love this idea of rewiring the way that we actually think about nutrition and wellness, right? Because I think a lot of the way that we view food and exercise is as a means of external factors, right? I want to look good in a bathing suit. I want to have really great skin, or those types of things are typically what I was told and what I was focusing on. And then when I started to rewire the way that I thought about nutrition and exercise, I started realizing, wait a second, if we think about this as a way of improving my energy, my mental health, my hormones, like all of these things that are actually, something that we all need to show up better in our daily lives, then how can we do that? So that's where the name really came from, is rewiring the way that we view nutrition and wellness, and kind of moving away from those old school mentalities of what air quote health looks like.
Yeah, I think that's so important too, because as a culture right now, with everything being focused on external and success and what we look like and everything like that, like even in the entrepreneurial community, that whole hustle culture and that you need to keep going and keep working at the expense of our health. Like, I love the idea of what would it look like to create sustainable CEOs, like people who realize that what it takes to last in business, if you're going to have a successful business, it means from the top down, we need to be leading from a place of health, because, the people that work for us and our teams, like, we are setting the example. And if we are running ourselves into the ground or, only doing it from a place of, how we look in a bathing suit, that comes off on our team. And, the expectation is that they think they should be working nonstop and, answering emails at 11:30 at night and all that kind of stuff. So I love what you said about that. Now, I'm going to take a guess, just based on where I was not too long ago, maybe 5 or so years ago, that the word gut might be completely foreign, especially if you've always thought, food has to do with weight loss, or there's healthy food and not healthy food. But like, to the lay person, what is the gut and what makes up the gut?
Mm-hmm. So when people think of the gut, I think they often think of their belly, right? You say like, oh, you got a beer gut or something like that, or it's in my gut. You typically grab your stomach when you say that. Now, when we're referring to the gut, which we have extensive research that's been, coming out over the past few years about gut health. When we're talking about gut health, we're really referring to the microbiome and these bacteria that reside in the lower part of the intestine. So you've got your mouth, you've got your esophagus, and then you've got your stomach. But what comes after the stomach is that the small and then the large intestine. And in the intestines is where we have these bacteria, also known as your microbes or your microbiome. And this is where we're seeing a lot of links to mental health, to performance, to metabolism, to thyroid. All of these types of things is really what we're referring to when we say gut health. So we're not really referring to the stomach, even though that is part of the digestive tract. We're really talking about this gut microbiome.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So when you're looking at the idea of it is these microbes that are living in our gut, how are they related to brain fog, or that like lack of clear thinking and that fogginess, or even like trouble sleeping? Like, how are they related to it?
Oh my gosh, I could go on for days about this. Let's start with the production of certain neurotransmitters and the production of melatonin. So these bacteria in our gut, we typically think of bacteria as being bad, but actually these bacteria in our gut are a positive thing. They absorb nutrients, they produce neurotransmitters, they digest our food. So the neurotransmitter side of things, so these bacteria can actually help to produce serotonin, right, that feel good hormone, GABA, which is a neurotransmitter that helps you feel calm, melatonin, right, that I think a lot of people are familiar with that one because that's related to sleep. So if your gut bacteria are imbalanced, or you have some form of leaky gut, which we can also talk about, then we're going to have dysfunction with these neurotransmitters and how they're impacting our mental health, our sleep, our energy, our mood, our motivation, right? I had a client even just last week, and we started properly fueling just for a week, and she said she actually went back to work after not being there for so long after the pandemic, and she was expecting to be, she's like, I'm usually very unorganized. She said, I was so focused. I felt because I had such a great breakfast and lunch, I wasn't distracted throughout the day. So neurotransmitters is a big part of it. Absorption of certain nutrients, right? So we know that we need vitamin B, we need iron, we need folate, we need magnesium. All of these nutrients we need for optimal mental health and focus and endurance. And so when our gut isn't absorbing those foods properly, then we're not going to get them, right? So it's not you are what you eat, it's you are what you absorb when we're talking about gut health. And then the third perspective is inflammation, right? So you see a lot of research on diabetes and heart disease and all of these conditions, they all link back towards inflammation. And it's the same with the gut. When your gut is inflamed, when it's stressed, then you're actually going to have that inflammation transfer over to your brain health. Your gut is your second brain. So any sort of inflammation going on in that gut, we're going to experience those symptoms like poor energy, decreased mood, inability to focus, and things like that.
That is so fascinating. So many things link back to the gut. And I think it plays a lot bigger of a part or a role in our health than most people assume it does. You know, I think most people go to exercise as the main thing that contributes to their health. But I spend so much time talking about inflammation and the big things like what you eat and the recovery you get to be able to recover. And those things are so important. So let's say we have an entrepreneur and they're like, yeah, I'm experiencing that. I've got the disorganization, the brain fog, you know, just that lack of clarity, the things that you were talking about there. How can you tell if it's gut related or something else? Like, is this something we can get tested for? Is there a test or a series? Like, where would you go if you didn't know if that's what was causing your problem?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some red flags. So there's certain lab tests that you can get done, you know, looking at your nutrients like B12 and iron. Those are, you know, when we talk about stress can really deplete your stomach acid. And so if you look at a lab test, you might see that these levels might be depleted due to, you know, chronic stress. I use the GI map in my practice, which is a DNA stool analysis, which is a really great way to actually look at the normal bacteria, the opportunistic bacteria. We look at Candida, H. pylori. We look at inflammation in the gut. So zonulin is the measure we look at for that. So in terms of testing, those are the main things that I use in my practice. Some symptoms that people can look for gut health issues that aren't necessarily digestive related. We have, you know, constipation, bloating, diarrhea, things like that that are more obvious, but looking for things like skin issues, psoriasis and eczema, those are big red flags. I mean, mood, right? So if you're having low energy, if you're suffering from anxiety and depression, chances are, you know, whether it's the chicken or the egg, there's some disruption going on in your gut. And then also food sensitivity. So if you find that you're eating certain foods, you're reacting more strongly to them than maybe you typically would have, that's a red flag. Hormone imbalance, you know, maybe your hormones are irregular, you have low sex drive, low testosterone, things like that. All of those things are related to gut health. So, I mean, gold standard would be to meet with a professional, get these tests done or have a full evaluation done to really see, you know, what could be going on. But those are some red flags of things I see a lot in my practice. I'll say something to a client. I'll be like, you know, in my intake form, do you have eczema or psoriasis? And they're like, why are you asking that? Like, your skin is your largest organ in your body. And if something's going on there in your gut, it's going to show up in your skin. So those are just a few tips.
That is so interesting. And you know, the interesting thing that you said is you were talking about constipation and diarrhea. And I think that that's one of those topics that is not talked about enough. And I know in your practice, you talk about it a lot. And I find it fascinating, even when I'm working with clients and they'll say to me like, I am so sorry, this is TMI. And they'll be all embarrassed about it, but they'll be like, I haven't gone to the bathroom in 3 days. I was like, no, this is important. This is not TMI. Like talking about how you excrete poop is important because it really is a sign of your digestive health. I don't know if you want to speak a little more on that because you talk very openly about how important that is.
I would love to speak more on it because it really, it is so important. I give a lot of corporate wellness talks and I put that Bristol stool chart like front and center. And I'm like, I'll send you the presentation later because I know everybody's dying to get it. Anyone listening right now, Google Bristol stool chart. You should be, right in the middle there with one of the type 4, type 5. Those are your ideal bowel movements. We talk about these, GI map, the stool test. We talk about the blood test. The easiest, cheapest tool that you have to look at your digestive health is what's coming out into the toilet. Is it happening daily? Is it, are you completely emptying? Is it, sticking to the bowl? Is it coming out in pebbles? Those are two extremes of things we don't want to see, right? So when I talk to clients about this, they say the same thing. They know I'm a gut health dietitian and that I focus on this, but still we're not comfortable as a society talking about it. But really, it's it's free. It's free to do, and it tells you so much about your health. So it's really good to start paying attention and tuning in there, because our bodies are incredible. They gave us such good feedback, and now my clients show up and they're like, hey, I was a type 2 today, or I was a type 4 today. And it's not weird anymore, right? Because you're used to talking about it, and we normalize it. And it allows me to then say, okay, hey, let's increase your fiber. Let's get your water up. And there are things that you can do to improve it. And, I have clients who have texted me before and been like, just had the best bowel movement. Like, you guys know what that feels like, right? You know what it feels like when your body is functioning like a well-oiled machine. It feels so good. And your example of, constipation for 3 days, oh my gosh, like anyone that's listening knows that's the worst feeling. You feel bloated, you feel fatigued, you feel that brain fog. Like, you can't focus. It's like you just are constantly focusing on how uncomfortable you are. So there's such a big connection there. And I want us to talk more about it.
Yeah, Ian, for those of you guys that haven't already whipped out your phone and Googled Bristol stool chart, it basically has animations of all the different shapes, textures, assortments of ways that you can poop, from like Erin said, little pebbles to like an S shape to all the kind of things like that. So it is definitely, I remember the first time I saw that and I was like, this is so interesting. And I just think it's something that we definitely need to pay more attention to. So just as a small jumping off point from that, I talk a lot with my clients about the idea of fiber. Now, a lot of people don't know that there's actually two types of fiber. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about the two types and what the purposes are?
Yeah, so there's soluble and there's insoluble fiber. And if you're a picky eater, this is incredibly important for you to listen to, because someone who's eating a diverse, diet with beans and nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables, and really focuses on diversity and getting all the colors of the rainbow, you probably don't have to be so specific about the insoluble versus soluble. Chances are, if you're eating a variety, you don't have to worry about it. But if you are someone who struggles with digestion or just general health, like, looking to improve your mental health, your motivation, things like that, insoluble is exactly what it sounds like. We don't actually absorb it. It's you can think of it as like the roughage that you're putting in the system to kind of help propel things and move it forward. Soluble fiber, again, exactly what it sounds like. It's actually digested and absorbed in our intestines, and it's really great for blood sugar balance. So this is one that if you are someone who gets these high highs and these low lows, maybe like your afternoon 3 o'clock slump, adding in some soluble fiber to a snack can really help to balance your blood sugar and keep your energy more stable throughout the day. So the soluble fiber you're going to find in things like citrus fruits are a great source of soluble fiber, as well as oatmeal. That's an excellent source of soluble fiber. Beans are a great source. And then in terms of the insoluble, again, just thinking of a variety of different things in your diet: broccoli, spinach, leafy greens, nuts and seeds, things like that.
So it's so interesting. I remember back to being in university, and one of the things that they helped me remember which type of fiber is for which is, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is soluble fiber slows it down. the
Mhm.
S and the S. And so then I just remember that the other type is what moves things along. So, I mean, while there's probably more on the surface to it, but if you're finding that you're backed up and you're constipated, potentially looking at adding more sources of insoluble fiber that Erin listed into your diet. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. That's a really great way to put it. And I don't want to discourage people from eating soluble, thinking like, oh, it slows down my digestion. I don't want that. You do actually want that because it's not going to mean that it's going to constipate you per se, but it's going to actually slow things down so that you're more satisfied, your blood sugar is more stable. And in combination with that insoluble, then we have healthy bowel movement. So I love that. That's a great way to remember it.
Yeah, that's so fun. So I want to switch gears a little bit. And I don't know if necessarily my audience has heard of this, but there is a nerve that we talk about called the vagus nerve specifically. And there's a lot of talk about that and the gut brain connection. Can you give us a little bit of an idea about what that is and why it's impacting us specifically as entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So the vagus nerve is probably one of the most important things for us to consider in terms of like our anatomical structure, in terms of mental health, our energy, our focus, ways of managing stress. This is a really important structure and an important connection. So I like to think of it as like, think of a basketball player gripping a basketball with their palm, right? They palm the basketball. You've got where your elbow is basically, we're going to be talking about your brain, and then it's this long line connecting to your gut, and then you've got these finger like projections that are touching the gut in multiple different areas. And so that vagus nerve from your brain to your gut is constantly, there's this bi-directional communication. So if something's wrong in your gut, it's going to be talking to your brain. If something's wrong in your brain, it's going to be talking to your gut. And so we can see that those types of things are going to be really important because we talk about stress, we talk about energy, we talk about motivation. If you're having distress in the gut, if you're having really stressful, if you're spending all day on your laptop or, just exposure to screen, what type of message is that going to send from your brain to your gut, right? Probably not a relaxing one, definitely not a relaxing one. There's really great research on the vagus nerve and ways that we can activate it in order to improve, things like stress response. Definitely spending less time on, your work computers and screen time in general is great, but ways that you can strengthen this relationship between your gut and your brain include things like yoga and meditation, exposure to cold water temperatures. So this is one I'll never get behind. Like, this became super popular. I met a woman recently and she's like, yes, I wake up every day and I go in the ocean. And I'm like, good for you. I will never do that. Meditation, yoga, right on board. Another thing too is singing, like singing or gurgling, like, some water in the back of your throat. These are also ways to strengthen and activate that vagus nerve. Probiotics are actually an evidence-based way to improve this vagus nerve connection. So taking a good high quality probiotic supplement or consuming foods that are rich in probiotics. So things like yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, any sort of fermented vegetables. These are all great ways to actually strengthen that connection. So it's really, really important to take care of your vagus nerve and to not, overstress yourself, because if you're working all day, if you're not taking breaks, if you're not fueling your body, this is going to significantly negatively impact this bi-directional communication between the two. So it's really, really important to practice those habits.
Well, that's so interesting, especially what you said about the cold, because I know we haven't talked about that on the podcast yet so far, but I do cold showers after workouts, specifically when my body's already really warm. But I did a podcast interview with a fellow health colleague, and she lives up north from me, and I'm in Vancouver, BC. So up north is even colder, and she actually has a tub that she keeps on her deck, and it's so cold there in the winter that it completely ices over, and in the morning she goes out there with an ice pick and actually hacks the ice off the surface and gets in, and she shows this on Instagram all the time, and I'm like, that is so Canadian. But like,
So
true,
Canadian.
like that's more Canadian than I am. I'm just like, hopping in my lukewarm cool shower after a workout. But that's interesting that does that too. And I mean, I mean, going off of that, like I talk to my clients about overworking all the time. I even just did an episode a couple weeks ago all about overworking and how we can set up those boundaries and stuff like that, because we have an inability to shut down at the end of the day. And as entrepreneurs, it's a fine line between, just checking in and that almost compulsive desire to always be connected.
Mm.
So how is that affecting our gut when it comes to like that constant stress?
Yeah, well, cortisol, the stress hormone, will be released when you're under constant stress. And we have eustress, which I'm sure you've talked about, right? Eustress is healthy stress. It's a good amount of stress. It actually does really wonderful things for our body. But when we hit that, that tipping point of too much stress, then that cortisol level is too high. And what that can actually do is alter the bacteria in our gut in a negative way and create inflammation in your gut. So I really stress this because food is great. I can talk about food all day. I can talk about supplements, but the way that cortisol, that stress hormone, negatively impacts the bacteria in our gut and the inflammation in that gut is profound. It's profound. So I hear you. Like, I hear you. You want to just get stuff done. You want to wake up tomorrow and feel like you checked the boxes yesterday. You need to deliver this and that. At what expense that you're doing that, though? Leaky gut sucks. Like, literally, that's just the most simple way to put it. It's not fun. When you get leaky gut, particles can then cross in from the gut into the bloodstream, causing an immune reaction. Now, over time, if you have a chronically stressed gut because of a chronically stressed brain, then you're going to have that constant immune response of your body saying, oh my gosh, stuff that's in the gut is going into the blood, invader, invader, invader. That's a recipe for autoimmune disease. We're seeing crazy rates of autoimmune disease in the world that we live in today. Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, we're seeing, fibromyalgia, like all of these things are coming out, and leaky gut is an absolute probable reason for these things happening. So I know it's tempting. I know it seems more productive, but there will be a point where your body will say no more. Your gut issues will get worse. You'll be miserable. Your productivity will just, plummet. So it's sustainability. We're thinking of how can we be sustainable, and taking care of your gut allows you to be more sustainable. You want to, function at a high level. And, I can empathize. I'm a one-woman show. I'm running my own business. I have a CBD oil company. I've got cookbooks. I've got one-on-one clients. I've got a lot of things going on, but I can tell you the one thing that people say to me is like, how do you just maintain so much for so long? It's like, well, because you don't just, beat yourself down and then, take a 3-month vacation and come back up. You take care of your gut, you take care of your health so that you can keep doing it for a really long time.
Oh, that is so true. Hey, and what's interesting is I've like having taken all the strategies together of sleep and everything like that, it is such an important thing. I think that both contributes to both of our ability to be so, and I use that word productive, but also to be able to make faster decisions and, think clear and be able to identify like, okay, this is the stuff that needs to get done, and not just about checking off boxes, but like, hey, here's what's going to move my business forward, and being able to focus on that without easily getting distracted all the time and feeling like you always need to snack and take a break and all of that kind of stuff. So if we're going back to the idea of leaky gut, is leaky gut something that is actually like a clinical diagnosis, or is it just a term like brain fog, which is more a collection of symptoms? Like, how is it an actual thing, or is it just a symptom set?
Yeah, so the clinical terminology would be intestinal hyperpermeability, meaning that the intestines in our gut lining are actually more permeable than they should be. So it's supposed to be nice and tight. It's supposed to be these nice tight junctions that do not allow things to cross through the gut into the blood where they shouldn't be. So there is a clinical diagnosis. Years ago, it used to be this like hippy dippy thing, like, oh yeah, leaky gut. And now we're like, oh, they're kind of like, okay, well, I guess we were wrong. Intestinal hyperpermeability is a real thing, and it's serious, but it's curable. And there are things you can do to test for it too. As I mentioned, zonulin is a measure of inflammation in the gut. That's what I use with the GI map. And so if a client comes to me and, they're super high stress, I will often see very high levels of zonulin. And there's plenty of things you can do to repair that gut lining. You just have to prioritize it.
Oh, that's so interesting. I one time heard a reference to leaky gut as like a healthy gut would be like a nice pair of nylons with a nice fine weave in them, as opposed to like a pair of fishnets. I mean, that's an exaggeration of it. But if you think about the size of particle that can pass through a fine weave versus something where there is damage to the gut wall and those gap junctions just aren't as tight between the cells, does that sound right?
That's an excellent description and visual for the listeners. Absolutely. That's a really great way to put it.
Oh, that's so interesting. So, beyond just the brain fog and potential autoimmune diseases, what might be some other symptoms that leaky gut is at play?
So many of the ones that I mentioned earlier about things that the signs and symptoms of having just poor gut health overall. So skin is a big one, food sensitivities, depression, anxiety, poor sleep, things like that. All of those symptoms are the same as leaky gut symptoms, because that's essentially what I was referring to when I was saying it. I didn't actually use the terminology. So those are all really big red flags of having leaky gut.
Yeah. Okay. So, say we like realize that, hey, it's something to do with our diet. What can we do about it?
Mm. So it's a process, and there will be people out there that will market a supplement or a diet, and the real important point of gut health is we need to get to the root cause, right? So we need to get to the root cause of why this is happening. So if you're listening and you're a CEO and you're working 60 hours a week, you're probably thinking, all right, like what's the supplement I can take? And you're thinking, oh, I don't have to address all the other things. Like, no, we have to address diet. We have to address your stress levels. We have to address your physical activity. Because yes, you can support your gut to do the things it needs to do, but ultimately it's at least a 4-step process where we're doing this removal phase, we're doing this repair phase, we're doing this repopulating phase where we're then putting the bacteria back in. So it's not a quick fix or a quick supplement that you can do. I mean, most of the people that I see who are working the way that most CEOs are working, they're not doing the basics, right? They're not getting breakfast. They're drinking coffee on an empty stomach before they have a full meal, which is a great way to increase your cortisol levels and stress out your gut. They're not eating enough fiber. So starting with the basics would be a really great place to start. If you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not ready to hire somebody right now, like I can't do the stool test, check your essentials. Are you eating balanced meals throughout the day? Start incorporating some probiotic rich foods in and see how your gut responds to them. The food that you eat is absolutely essential part of this process, and it's something that you can start to change today.
Yeah. So, are there specific stool tests that you'd recommend, or do you always recommend going to someone who is certified, like a nutritionist or a doctor, and having them prescribe? Because we see lots of ones out there like Viome and all of these different ones. Like, do you have any experience with those, or do you recommend something like going through a practitioner with, one that is specific to their practice?
So in my practice, I use the GI map, and it's the tests themselves are definitely different. There are ones that are more sensitive to others, right? So you have ones that might not pick up on a parasite or might not pick up on candida. But then the other important component of this is the analysis. So, we hear about H. pylori and candida, and, if someone just goes out and does one of these tests that they can buy online, it might come back and say, oh, your H. pylori is high. They say it too on the GI map. It'll say this is high. What I consider clinically significant is going to be different than what, another company considers clinically significant. So you really want someone who's trained in this to interpret the results, because guess what? H. pylori, for example, is an excellent, protector of gut health. It's a protector of autoimmune disease. And if you just get a test back and say, oh, let's just wipe it out, then you could be screwing yourself over. So I highly recommend that if you're going to do these tests, they're not cheap. Like, these are not cheap. So if you're going to do it with a practitioner who can interpret the results and create a realistic plan. Because another thing too, right? I had a client who wanted to do the GI map, and I was like, you don't have any symptoms or anything that really would indicate that we need to do it. But she was like, I think it's cool. I want to look at it. And I love that, right? That's awesome. I love doing that too. It came back and said her H. pylori was a little high and she had no symptoms of H. pylori. So we're not going to treat that. Like there's no reason to treat something if you're not having symptoms. And so had she just gone out and done it on her own, she could have done more harm than good. I hope that makes sense.
The H. pylori one is interesting because like I don't even know like what symptoms you would look for to associate with that. So that what you said is like bang on, I think so important. So how does that relate to like if someone were to go out and get a food sensitivity testing and it says like, like tomatoes are not your thing, but you're good with brown rice, like how would those work for someone and how accurate are those?
Well, I think one thing you mentioned that would also be really important, especially for this population, would be acid reflux, right? Because a lot of what I see in people that are, at these levels of stress is acid reflux symptoms, and H. pylori can cause a lot of acid reflux, and down the road can be pretty serious and can lead to ulcers. So it's really important to think about that symptom management, as I mentioned prior. But the food sensitivity testing thing, oftentimes people will say, well, I'm kind of bloated, I feel like I just want to know like what I'm reacting to. Your first thing is your body will react to food. Your body is going to acknowledge food regardless. If you eat a lot of something, if you eat eggs for breakfast every day, your body's probably going to start reacting to it. Does it necessarily mean it's a negative thing? Not necessarily. Also, if you have leaky gut, you're going to be more reactive to things. So let's get to the root cause. We fix the issue, and then you don't react to the eggs. So again, money, like this is, you're throwing money to these companies who food sensitivity testing is also not supported by research. That doesn't mean that I don't think there's any relevance to it. But what I will say in my own personal practice, I've seen food sensitivity tests, not resolve the issue completely. I've seen it cause poor relationship with food, because then people are like, oh, well, I'm sensitive to dairy. That means I can never eat dairy again. It's like, no, there's a systematic process for removal and reintroduction, because you don't want to, eliminate these foods from the diet completely. So, and then there's just not enough evidence to support them. So I don't personally use them in my practice. I don't ever recommend them. There's not enough evidence to support them. I focus on getting to the root cause of why that person's not, reacting to that food properly. And then, we start to do that in a sequential manner of removal and reintroduction before that we would be supporting the gut in order to do that.
I just want everyone listening to really hear what she just said. The food sensitivity testing, it has a purpose, but not as a method of treating the underlying condition. Because if it says we don't react well to eggs and we pull out eggs, but it was never really eggs that was a problem, but the leaky gut to begin with, if we're never actually fixing the leaky gut, you can pull out and add foods all day long. It's just like the Band-Aid instead of fixing the actual problem. And I think that that is something that we gloss over because of how popular these food sensitivity tests have and accessible they have become. And there is their place for them, I can imagine, but not at the expense of not getting to the root of the problem. That is so good. I love that.
I think an important point too here is like, I was victim to these tests like many years ago, and part of me just wanted a reason for my symptoms. And let me tell you something. I was highly stressed. I was working 3 jobs. I was also getting my master's degree, and I had digestive issues. What do you know? Like, what a shocker. So I did food sensitivity testing because I was like, oh, it's got to be the food that I'm eating. I wanted to have any reason not to have to focus on the fact that I was way overworked and overstressed. And so that's when I went to the food sensitivity testing. So I get that you want some validation for your symptoms, but it's not a solution. So really, really important take-home message there.
Oh, that's so good. So I've got a question to ask, and it actually probably already answered it. So there's so much mainstream media hype right now around gluten and gliadin and just, don't eat it, do eat it. It's bad for you. It's the whole cause of all your inflammation. There are so many books written about it right now. Is it overhyped or important to watch? Where do you fall on that?
I think, we have these extremes of the spectrum, right? I think there are certain cases where we're missing like people that truly do have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, right? And it could be an issue for these people. So I think it's good to be more aware. It's kind of like, we find something out and we get overly excited about it. So we find that non-celiac gluten sensitivity is a thing. And then all of a sudden we're like, well, it must be a thing for everybody. No, I work with, Olympic level athletes on a regular basis who are consuming, a loaf of bread before they go, run a marathon. So no, gluten's not inflammatory for everybody. However, it's an area of let's watch this. Let's see if this is something that could be contributing. But where's the gluten coming from? I mean, are we eating pastries and pizza and, all these other things? If we're doing that, then chances are it's not really the gluten that's causing issues. It's everything else that's going on in the digestive system. There's also other components to these gluten containing foods like a high FODMAP. So wheat is a high FODMAP. So that's really important for people to know that there's other components of these gluten containing foods that could be irritating your symptoms. And it's not necessarily the gluten itself. It's really tough to diagnose, which is, I did a whole episode on this on my podcast because of it, because I know how the different nuances of it. But if you're consuming a relatively whole food, unprocessed diet, and you're eating some gluten containing foods like barley and farro, and you're still feeling this like brain fog, these digestive issues, some skin flare ups, then it's probably worth it to give it a trial and cut out gluten. If you're, eating pizzas and cakes and stuff like that, I would bet that a lot of your symptoms would improve from just cleaning up the diet a little bit. So short answer, yes, keep an eye out for it. Always talk to your gastroenterologist about getting tested for celiac and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But also, let's take a look at the diet and make sure that we're not, not missing something that's really obvious.
Yeah, I think it just comes back down to that whole processed versus unprocessed food debate. I think that's at the root of it all. And I've talked about this about so many episodes. Like, look at your plate. Did it come from the ground or have a mother? That's how you can tell it's a whole food. If you look at it, like, let's look at a cheesy. Yeah. I don't think that came from the ground. And I don't think it had a mother. So these are brilliant signs that these might not be foods that we're wanting to incorporate on a regular basis. So it sounds like when you're talking about farro and barley that have gluten in them, they're also from whole food sources, which are not combined with who knows how many other chemicals and, ground down flour and sugar and all of those things that may be actual cause in the first place.
Yeah. And I also want to bring on the other side of the spectrum too, right? Like I've met with clients who are, I met with a male a few months ago and he was like, he had really bad digestive issues. He was more constipated. And all of these issues actually started when he started eating, air quotes, healthier. And so his breakfast was like a protein shake. His lunch was like a kale salad with avocado and, quinoa. And then his dinner was like a piece of salmon with asparagus. He was living with his girlfriend. She was trying to get ready for the wedding, all this stuff. He was under fueling. So, processed food, highly processed, highly palatable foods, not great for your gut, but also under fueling can look like protein shake, kale smoothie lifestyle. Like you could still not be getting enough fuel and nutrients for your body and, protein and omega-3 fats and things like that. So there's both ends of the spectrums that are very, very important.
Yeah. I feel like I say that all the time to my clients, especially when we pull out processed foods. I'm like, no, you're going to have to eat more volume than you used to when, cereal and pizza was your regular go-to. And I'm saying all the time, like, one egg is not enough for a meal. Like, where is your balance in there? And always saying like, the goal is not to teach your body to eat as little as it can, because all that does is literally reinforce that cycle of only being able to eat that much for the rest of your life. So if you want to be trapped on 1,200 calories a day, I'll tell you how to do it. Eat 1,200 calories a day, because as soon as you try to eat normally again, your body's not going to respond well to that extra food. So it's something that you want to think about when you're looking at like health. Health does not mean removing calories. It means looking at the food you're eating way more whole foods, and making sure that you're eating enough to sustain your energy and keep a healthy gut.
Yeah, quality is, I mean, I work with some CEOs, and they wake up, they have a, toast with peanut butter, and then all of a sudden at the end of the day, they're eating popcorn, and they're eating, chips, and they've got this big dinner, and because they're starving, because they didn't eat all day. And what does that do? Hello, acid reflux. You're eating all that food before you go to bed, and then your gut's all over the place. It's not regular. Your digestion's all off. So it's really important. Think of the basics. Like, don't go skipping meals. Get your protein at every meal. These things are simple, yet they're not common. They're simple yet not common.
Yeah. Oh, I love everything you said. And honestly, I think I could probably ask you questions for like another hour, but I'm not going to do that. So I want to wrap up with 2 questions. The first one being, like, everything we talked about today, what is one action that you think that, anybody could do today to take care of their gut just a little bit better?
I think I'm going to make it food related, because if I was thinking of like work related, I'd say start setting boundaries. But I think from a food perspective is consistency, right? Because that example that I just mentioned of, tiny meal for breakfast, all this food in the afternoon, skipping meals, different times during the day, try to get your body, on a regular eating schedule, even if it's with cereal, Doritos, like, just get your body on a schedule. First things first, like your gut microbiome actually has its own circadian rhythm. It's like a newborn baby. If you don't have a schedule for it, it's going to get angry and upset. It's not going to sleep right. That's your body. Like, your body will be that. So start with a schedule and a routine for your eating, and then start to focus on the quality of it. But be realistic about it. Don't try to jump in and do all these crazy protocols and things like that. Get the basics down before you decide that you're going to start, getting in the details.
I love that. That is so simple. It doesn't have to go, getting new recipes, going grocery shopping, being all fancy, meal prep container. It's just eat at the relatively similar times consistently. I love that. I love that. So to wrap up, Erin, tell us not only about your podcast, because I'm assuming if we're listening to a podcast here, we're podcast people. So tell us about your podcast, and where my audience can find you and keep in touch with it if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. So my podcast is nutritionrewired.com, and you can listen to the podcast directly on there, or you can search Nutrition Rewired on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music. Got some really great episodes, always linking back to evidence-based. I always say evidence-based, but not evidence-limited. So you'll hear, new, unique, stories that I've had with clients. I've been in this field for several years. We talk about things that your doctors might not be talking about. We talk about gut health. We always link back to gut health, but we overall talk about nutrition, properly fueling, improving mental health, things like that. And all my other resources are on my website, and my Instagram, as you mentioned, is Nutrition Rewired.
Oh, I love that. And that's the last thing I'm going to close out with is I feel like, in my experience, having known Erin, the one thing that makes her stand out the most is everything is evidence-based and research linked. Like, that is, I think that really makes her stand out beyond just all of the surface information we're getting out there. It's always factual. It's, it's interesting and it's relevant. So that is one of the reasons I still follow her, is because I know that the information I'm getting is accurate. And I feel like that's really hard to find in this giant sea of information online right now. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know my audience is absolutely going to love that. So I appreciate you taking your time, and thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
My pleasure, Tanessa. Thanks for listening, everyone, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Ready to begin each day feeling energized and focused? I'd love to work with you one-on-one. In my Becoming Limitless program, you're going to learn how to optimize your brain and body with science and biohacking so you can be highly productive and grow your business faster. Join me over at TanessaShears.com/work with me. I'll see you there.